Awaken your spirit. Chosen ones. The truth doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives with receipts. There are people in your life who survive entirely on what you don't know, not on lies alone, but on missing context, on stories that were never connected, on patterns you never laid side by side long enough to see the shape they form. They don't need to be perfect manipulators. They just need you to stay curious instead of informed. And most people do, because information is uncomfortable, but confusion is familiar. Here's a quiet fact that doesn't get enough airtime. When researchers study long-term relational harm, they find that most damage isn't caused by one dramatic betrayal. It's caused by repeated small violations that never get named. Not because they're invisible, but because they're inconvenient. The human brain is incredibly good at protecting emotional investments. We don't ignore red flags because we're stupid. We ignore them because we've already paid too much to walk away. That's why the full story is so dangerous. Not because it's shocking, but because it's boringly consistent. It turns emotional chaos into a timeline. It replaces maybe with again. And once that happens, something awkward sets in. Empathy starts needing boundaries. Suddenly, the benefit of the doubt feels like unpaid labor. And the phrase, "that's just how they are," starts sounding like a resignation letter you never meant to sign. There's also a strange humor in it, if we're honest. The same people who swear they hate drama somehow keep excellent attendance at every conflict. The ones who say they value honesty always seem allergic to details. It's almost impressive, like watching someone trip over the same lie and still blame the flaw. This isn't about anger. It's about clarity, about what happens when you stop judging moments and start reading patterns. Because if you ever sat down with the full story, not the edited version, not the apology remix, not the "it's complicated" special edition, you wouldn't need closure. You'd need distance. And you wouldn't announce it. You'd just cut the signal and move on, calm, awake, and done. Number 1. They don't misunderstand you. They rely on your ignorance of their pattern. There's a big difference between someone who truly doesn't get you and someone who hopes you never connect the dots. Misunderstanding is accidental. Patterns are intentional. When a person keeps hurting you in ways that feel oddly familiar, it's not because communication failed again. It's because you're being shown the same behavior through different scenes, different moods, different excuses. The problem is not clarity. The problem is sequencing. As long as each incident stands alone in your mind, they stay safe. They rely on your tendency to treat every situation as a fresh start. Today's apology wipes out yesterday's damage. Today's good mood cancels last week's disrespect. They know most people are generous like that. They know you'll judge moments instead of totals. That's the blind spot. Because once you start lining things up, once you notice how the same outcome keeps happening no matter the explanation, the illusion collapses fast. This is why they hate comparisons. Not to other people, but to themselves over time. They don't want you remembering how similar this feels to the last time or the time before that. They want every incident to feel isolated, emotional, confusing, and slightly your fault. Confusion buys them time. Clarity ends the arrangement. What's unsettling is that they don't need to lie much. They just need you to stay zoomed in, focused on tone, focused on intent, focused on how bad they say they feel. Meanwhile, the behavior keeps landing in the same place, with the same cost to you. Energy lost, boundaries bent, self-doubt growing quietly in the background. Once you see the pattern, the relationship changes without a word being spoken. Their explanations start sounding recycled. Their apologies feel incomplete before they even finish talking. Not because you've become cold, but because you've become accurate. Accuracy is uncomfortable for people who survive on selective memory. If you ever fully understood how consistent they've been with this behavior, not just with you, but across situations, you wouldn't feel the need to explain yourself anymore. You wouldn't argue. You wouldn't chase resolution. You'd simply recognize that this isn't confusion. It's repetition. And repetition doesn't need another conversation. It needs an ending. Number 2. The version of them you love exists only where accountability is absent. The person you think you know, the one who smiles, charms, and shows warmth, only exists in a vacuum where consequences don't exist. When responsibility enters the room, that version disappears like mist. Kindness, empathy, and attention aren't qualities they carry. They're tools they deploy when it's safe, when no one can hold them accountable. You fall in love with the gaps between their missteps, not the person themselves. In relationships, accountability is like a mirror. It reflects true character. Some people can only show their good self when the mirror is removed, when mistakes are excused, or when no one is watching closely enough to catch patterns. That's why you notice a sudden shift the moment things get inconvenient. That charming, funny, thoughtful version collapses into excuses, blame, or cold indifference. It isn't inconsistency. It's design. Their appealing self is not a reflection of who they are. It's a reflection of how much freedom they have to manipulate perception. You start making allowances because the behavior is subtle at first. A missed promise, a small lie, a slight disregard. Nothing extreme, nothing undeniable. But those moments add up. Every time the good version reappears, it reinforces hope, keeps you attached, and makes you rationalize what you shouldn't tolerate. That hope is the hook. It's what convinces you that accountability is the problem, not them. The truth is, they only operate fully in spaces where no one can challenge them. Recognizing this doesn't require anger, it requires observation. Watch how their charm retreats under scrutiny, how their warmth disappears when the weight of responsibility hits. That's the version you fell for. Conditional, fragile, and entirely dependent on your willingness to ignore consequences. Once you see it, the illusion cracks. The person you thought you loved isn't gone. They were never real. The real version is steady in their self-interest, consistent in avoiding accountability, and unbothered by what they cost others. Accepting that truth is brutal, but necessary. It's not cruelty to leave. It's clarity. And clarity is the moment you stop mistaking performance for authenticity. Number 3. They benefit more from your confusion than from your trust. Some people don't need to actively hurt you to gain power over you. They thrive quietly, invisibly, in the space created by your doubt, your hesitation, and your endless attempts to make sense of them. Confusion is their currency. Every time you pause to question yourself, every time you wonder if you overreacted, every time you replay conversations in your head searching for clarity, they gain. Not in money, not in attention, but in control. Your uncertainty keeps the system running, and you pay the cost. Trust is simple. Trust is clear, measurable, and accountable. It can be rewarded or broken in one moment. Confusion, on the other hand, lingers. It seeps in slowly. It keeps you second-guessing, apologizing for your reactions, and forgiving behaviors that should never have been tolerated. While trust can end, confusion can last indefinitely. That's why they don't fear losing your faith. They fear losing your hesitation. That subtle imbalance is the leverage they live on. It's exhausting to live in someone's fog. You think your patience or empathy matters, but what matters to them is that you keep trying to untangle the knots they tie. They don't need to clarify. They need you tangled. Every half-truth, every selective memory, every "I didn't mean it like that" adds another layer to the confusion, and each layer strengthens their position. Meanwhile, your energy erodes quietly, almost without you noticing, until you're too worn out to stand firm. Once you see the pattern, it's chilling. The same person who claims to care about your feelings has built their entire relationship with you on what they can obscure. Your confusion becomes the scaffolding for their freedom to act without accountability. The moment clarity arrives, the spell breaks. Apologies stop feeling sincere, explanations feel rehearsed, and the power you gave away without realizing it becomes painfully obvious. Understanding this is brutal, but liberating. Confusion is not an accident, it's a tool, and it has been used expertly. The people who benefit from it don't even need to speak loudly. They simply let you spin, overthink, and forgive, while they maintain their advantage silently. Recognizing this gives you something they will never have, a clear view of the architecture of control. Number 4. What they call mistakes are rehearsed behaviors with plausible deniability. People will often hide behind the word mistake as if it absolves them of responsibility, as if it transforms intent into accident. But patterns don't emerge from accidents, they emerge from repetition. The same slip, the same boundary crossed, the same excuse appearing again and again is not a quirk. It's rehearsal. They've tested the limits quietly, noting how far they can go before being challenged. Every so-called oops is carefully placed in a context where it can be explained, minimized, or denied. That's why they always sound believable. Denial becomes a performance art, and you are the unwitting audience, applauding or forgiving because it seems accidental. This is subtle. They don't announce their intentions. They create situations where they can act the same way and retreat behind the curtain of plausibility. The missed promises, the tiny betrayals, the manipulations hidden in casual words, they are not spontaneous. They are rehearsed moves designed to see how much you will allow. And the brilliance, or the cruelty, lies in how natural it looks. You don't feel manipulated at first. You just feel unsettled, confused, or guilty. The word mistake is their weapon. It flips blame back onto you, makes you overanalyze your response, and masks the fact that the behavior is deliberate. Once you recognize this, the pattern becomes unmistakable. You notice the consistency. The same behavior repeats, even when the story or context changes. The apologies start to sound identical. The excuses feel familiar. And you realize what you thought was chaos or unpredictability is actually a meticulously crafted script designed to maintain their advantage without ever owning it. Understanding this isn't about cynicism, it's about precision. Mistakes are forgivable, but rehearsed behaviors disguised as mistakes are a signal. They show exactly who this person is and how far they're willing to go while keeping plausible deniability on their side. The moment you see it, the fog lifts. Excuses lose their power. Patterns speak louder than words. And the clarity that follows gives you one thing they cannot touch: the ability to stop the cycle before it ever touches you again. Number 5, they never cross lines loudly. They erase them quietly. The most insidious people don't announce when they overstep. They don't make grand gestures of harm. They don't storm in like villains in a movie. They move quietly, almost imperceptibly, shifting boundaries one small step at a time until what once felt sacred or untouchable is suddenly negotiable or erased entirely. By the time you notice, the line you thought was clear has been rewritten, and you're left questioning your own judgment, wondering if you imagined it. This is deliberate. Every casual disregard, every small betrayal, every overlooked promise is a calculated test. It's how they measure how much they can bend without breaking the structure you've built around yourself. They rely on subtlety because subtlety breeds doubt. When lines are crossed loudly, confrontation follows. When lines are crossed quietly, confusion takes root. You start doubting yourself, your perception, your memory. You start rationalizing, forgiving, excusing, adjusting. That quiet erosion is their power. It's quiet, invisible, and completely effective. The danger is that these erasures feel personal, yet they are never about you. They are about control, about ensuring the rules of engagement are rewritten in their favor. The people who do this are masters at disguising intent. They make you feel like the problem is your sensitivity, your inability to let things slide, or your overthinking. Meanwhile, the boundary they removed was never yours to lose. It was yours to enforce. But they've worn you down so carefully that you stop defending it. Once you see the pattern, everything shifts. You notice how easily respect disappears, how casually promises are broken, how often your limits are tested without acknowledgement. The quiet nature of the violation is what makes it so effective. Loud disrespect is obvious. Quiet erasure is insidious. And when the line is gone, when your tolerance has been stretched to its breaking point, the person responsible doesn't need to argue, manipulate, or apologize. They just move forward, unbothered, leaving you scrambling to reclaim what should have never been negotiable. Understanding this gives clarity. The lesson isn't revenge, it's awareness. If someone erases lines quietly, you stop treating every minor slip as an accident. You see the pattern, recognize the tactic, and reclaim the boundaries that were being stolen under the radar. Once you do that, the quiet manipulation loses all its power. Number 6, their apologies are negotiations, not remorse. Not every "I'm sorry" is an expression of regret. Some apologies are contracts, carefully worded to extract forgiveness while protecting the person offering them. They are negotiations disguised as remorse. The words sound right, the tone feels sincere, and you almost want to believe it. But if you pay attention, you notice the fine print. The apology comes with conditions, timing, or expectations. It isn't about acknowledging the harm done. It's about restoring access, regaining control, or testing how much you're willing to overlook. These apologies are tactical. They arrive after you've invested emotionally, when tension has reached a point where your empathy is at its peak. That's no accident. They know exactly when to deliver them to maximize compliance and minimize accountability. They aren't trying to heal anything. They are trying to reset the board. They measure the effectiveness of their words by how quickly you drop your defenses, not by the sincerity of their understanding. The difference between true remorse and negotiation lies in outcomes. A real apology shifts behavior. It doesn't come with excuses, justification, or expectation of continued tolerance. A negotiated apology, on the other hand, often feels rehearsed, incomplete, or strategically vague. You may leave feeling partially satisfied, thinking something has changed, while the pattern continues in private. The harm is temporarily softened, but the root remains untouched. The cruel brilliance of this tactic is subtle. They appear contrite enough to satisfy social expectations, enough to placate your anger, and enough to make you doubt your own judgment. You start to question whether you're holding a grudge, whether you're overreacting, or whether you're imagining the pattern of disregard. And while you wrestle with that, the cycle resumes, sometimes slower, sometimes faster, but always calibrated to test your limits. Once you see it for what it is, the power of their apology vanishes. You realize the words were never meant to mend. They were meant to manipulate. Recognizing this changes everything. You no longer measure them by what they say, but by what they consistently do. And suddenly, sorry is no longer an invitation to forgive. It's a warning to watch closely and protect yourself before the cycle begins again. Number 7, they remember your weaknesses better than your boundaries. People like this don't forget. Not really. They don't carry grudges, but they carry mental files, carefully labeled and meticulously organized, of every insecurity, every vulnerability, every hesitation you've ever shown. Your boundaries are often invisible to them, or worse, irrelevant. They don't respect the limits you set. They track the places where you've wavered, where you've doubted yourself, and where you've given in. Those are the spots they return to, over and over, not because they need to hurt you, but because they've discovered exactly how far they can go without resistance. This is why subtle manipulation works so effectively. You may have drawn a line once, clearly and decisively, but they remember the one time you hesitated. They remember the time you over-explained, rationalized, or apologized. Every weakness becomes a blueprint for influence. Your past confusion, your hidden fears, your overlooked vulnerabilities. They store all of it for when they need leverage, when they need compliance, or when they simply want to see how much you'll allow. Boundaries without enforcement are invisible. Weaknesses with consistency are invitations. It's unnerving because they rarely attack where you're strongest. They attack where you've already shown cracks, the corners of yourself you didn't even realize were exposed. And when they do, it rarely feels like aggression. It feels like gentle nudges, casual remarks, or playful reminders. That's what keeps you second-guessing yourself. You think, maybe I overreacted. Maybe it's my fault. Meanwhile, they're watching carefully, measuring, calibrating. Recognizing this changes the game. You start seeing the difference between genuine care and calculated attention. You start seeing that the person who seems so attuned to you isn't empathizing. They're mapping. They don't need to remember your boundaries. They only need to remember where you falter. And once you see it clearly, once you notice how often your past vulnerabilities are used against you, it becomes impossible to continue playing the same way. Awareness replaces uncertainty. Protection replaces trust. And the person who thought they could rely on your weaknesses suddenly finds you no longer a playground, but a fortress. Number 8, they only support you when your growth doesn't disrupt their advantage. Support from them is rarely genuine. It comes with an invisible line. You can grow, improve, or succeed, just as long as it doesn't threaten their comfort, control, or status. Their version of encouragement is conditional, carefully measured, and self-serving. They applaud your progress when it aligns with their interests, but the moment your growth challenges their influence, exposes their shortcomings, or removes the leverage they've relied on, that support evaporates. What feels like mentorship or care is often just a temporary accommodation for convenience. They don't cheer because they believe in you. They cheer because they benefit from the version of you that remains useful to them. Your wins are celebrated only when they're predictable, limited, and easily absorbed into their narrative. But as soon as you step outside that frame, as soon as your evolution shakes the foundation they've built, their warmth disappears. Suddenly, your ambition is inconvenient. Your independence is threatening. Their words of encouragement, once sincere seeming, start to feel hollow, rehearsed, or tinged with subtle criticism. The cruel irony is that they often make you feel guilty for growing. They frame your independence as betrayal, your confidence as arrogance, and your assertiveness as a challenge to their authority. You might even start doubting yourself, wondering if your progress is too much, if your boundaries are excessive, or if your success is somehow unfair. That confusion is their safeguard. It keeps you hesitant, self-policing, and easier to influence. Recognizing this pattern is liberating. Support that disappears when it's inconvenient is not support, it's a transaction. And once you see the transaction clearly, you stop seeking validation from them. You stop trying to fit your growth into their comfort zone. You stop apologizing for becoming more than what they want you to be. True growth is never limited by someone else's agenda. Once you embrace that, you start moving forward with clarity and confidence, leaving behind those who only ever wanted you to grow just enough to serve them, but never enough to surpass them. Number 9, they provoke reactions, then judge you for having them. Some people don't need to attack directly to control you. They provoke subtly, consistently, and with precision, knowing exactly which buttons to press. It isn't loud or dramatic. It's a glance, a remark, a tone, a carefully timed action. They create situations designed to elicit a response, watching carefully as your emotions bubble, flare, or freeze. And the moment you react, the tables turn. Suddenly, your feelings are the problem. You're overreacting, too sensitive or unstable, while they sit back as the measured observer. This tactic is brilliant because it flips accountability. They don't have to defend their behavior because your reaction becomes the evidence. Your anger, your hurt, your frustration, these are what they point to as proof that the issue lies with you, not with their repeated instigations. You begin to doubt your own instincts, replaying interactions in your head, analyzing tone and intent, wondering if your feelings are justified. And that self-doubt is the very leverage they were after. It's even more insidious because it feels personal, like an argument between equals, when in reality, it's a trap. Every word, every action, every misdirection is calculated to provoke, to test limits, to see how much they can control without overt confrontation. The goal isn't to resolve conflict, it's to measure your reactions, to keep you uncertain, and to maintain the upper hand emotionally. Once you recognize the pattern, everything shifts. You see that the instigator is not your peer, not your partner, not your friend. They are an architect of emotional manipulation. Your reactions are not the problem, they are the symptom. And when you stop giving them power over your responses, their tactic loses its effect. You no longer feel guilty for reacting. You no longer play into the cycle. You simply observe, decide your boundaries, and act with clarity. The moment you stop participating in their provocation, you reclaim your emotional independence, and the dynamic they relied on for control collapses entirely. Number 10. Their loyalty is conditional, not mutual. Some people appear loyal until loyalty becomes inconvenient. It's not that they are disloyal by nature, it's that their loyalty always has an expiration date, one determined entirely by their comfort, benefit, or emotional convenience. They expect you to stand by them through chaos, mistakes, and self-serving choices. But the moment circumstances shift and supporting you becomes inconvenient, their allegiance vanishes as quietly as it arrived. What they offer is not mutual respect or partnership. It's a one-sided contract disguised as devotion. This type of loyalty is transactional. They measure relationships by what they gain, what remains easy, or what feeds their ego. Your loyalty, your patience, your energy, and your forgiveness are counted as payment. They don't mirror it because they aren't operating from the same standard. You are expected to stay present, forgiving, understanding, and available, while their presence, attention, and care are optional, flexible, and conditional. You're loyal to principles they never honor. The danger lies in the subtlety. At first, their devotion feels sincere, even inspiring. You begin to invest emotionally, assuming that commitment is reciprocal. Over time, patterns emerge. Support disappears when it matters most. Affection fades when it no longer serves them. Apologies come, but only when convenient. Promises are made without intention of keeping them. That's the hallmark of conditional loyalty. It isn't absent, it's selective, and its selectiveness is always in their favor. Recognizing this doesn't require anger. It requires honesty. You see that your efforts, your care, and your patience are not reciprocated because you are not dealing with someone who operates on the same code of loyalty. Once you understand that loyalty is conditional, you stop expecting permanence where there is none. You stop giving energy to someone who measures connection by convenience rather than principle. And once that clarity hits, you realize that true loyalty doesn't need negotiation, performance, or timing. It is steady, reliable, and uncompromising, and it's something you only give and receive with people who understand that value. Number 11. They rewrite history to protect their self-image, not the relationship. Some people are master storytellers, and not in a flattering way. They have a habit of rewriting events, not to clarify, not to resolve, but to protect themselves. When conflict arises, when mistakes are confronted, or when their actions are called into question, the memory of what actually happened becomes negotiable. What they remember, how they frame it, and the details they choose to emphasize are all carefully edited to preserve their image. They are not preserving the relationship, they are preserving themselves. This behavior is subtle, but powerful. At first, it seems like a difference in perspective. You think, maybe you misremembered, maybe you overreacted. But over time, the discrepancies pile up. You notice that conversations, promises, and events are reframed in ways that always favor them. You start to catch patterns, how the same incident is told differently depending on who's listening, or how the story conveniently omits inconvenient details. Each retelling isn't a mistake. It's a carefully curated performance designed to minimize guilt and maximize control. The effect is disorienting. You begin questioning your own memory, doubting your perception, and second-guessing your reactions. The more you try to correct the narrative, the more they shift it, making it feel like you're the one losing clarity. This isn't just manipulation, it's emotional containment. By controlling the story, they control how you feel about it, how others perceive it, and how much power you have to hold them accountable. Once you see the pattern, it's liberating. You realize the goal was never reconciliation, compromise, or honesty. It was impression management. Their priority was their ego, not the bond you thought you shared. Recognizing this frees you from the trap of editing your own memory to fit theirs. You stop trying to argue for truth in their version of events and start trusting your own perception. When history becomes a tool for self-preservation, clarity becomes your rebellion. And that rebellion is where you reclaim control, understanding that the relationship can only be real when both parties honor reality, not just the version that looks best for them. Number 12. They don't fear losing you. They fear losing control over you. The truth about people who manipulate or dominate subtly is that attachment isn't their goal. Control is. They aren't worried about whether you leave in the sense of missing companionship or losing emotional connection. What terrifies them is the moment you step out of their influence, the moment your decisions, your boundaries, and your independence no longer revolve around them. They have no problem with distance if it keeps you predictable, compliant, or reachable on their terms. What they can't handle is the loss of leverage, the loss of quiet authority they've built over your decisions, your energy, and your perception of them. This fear is invisible but powerful. It drives behavior more than affection ever could. Sudden attention, dramatic gestures, or even the rare vulnerability is never about closeness. It's about testing the limits of influence. If you're slipping out of reach, emotionally or physically, they act. The actions aren't born from love or care. They're calculated, reactive, precise. They want to restore the equilibrium where your life, your reactions, or your emotions are still under subtle calibration by them. The danger is that this type of control is easy to miss until you see the pattern. You may feel loved, needed, or central to their world, but the moment you assert yourself in ways that disrupt their comfort or autonomy, the dynamic shifts. Criticism, guilt-tripping, sudden charm, or manipulative apologies flood in. It isn't affection, It's an attempt to reclaim authority over your choices. They measure success by how quickly you return to the orbit they set, not by the quality of your connection. Understanding this is brutal, but clarifying. When you realize the person you thought cared about you primarily fears losing control rather than losing you, their power diminishes. Their manipulations, once subtle and disorienting, become transparent. You stop bending to preserve a relationship that was never about mutual respect. You stop rationalizing their behavior as love or concern. And once that clarity sets in, you reclaim your decisions, your boundaries, and your freedom, rendering their fear meaningless because control only exists where you allow it. And now you refuse. Number 13. They drain you subtly, so you doubt your own strength. Some people don't need to be overtly cruel to dominate. They drain you quietly, almost imperceptibly, until your confidence and energy are worn thin. It doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It's slow, strategic, and accumulative. Every small demand, every emotional pull, every minor manipulation chips away at your reserves. You don't notice it immediately, because it rarely feels like an attack. It feels like normal life, like compromise, like care. And that's exactly why it works. The subtlety is what makes it so effective. They know how to extract energy without triggering resistance. A comment here, a sigh there, a small expectation that bends your routine. They all seem harmless alone, but collectively they erode your sense of self. Your decisions become weighed with doubt, your boundaries begin to blur, and your instinct to defend yourself feels like overreaction. By the time you realize what's happening, you're exhausted, questioning your own judgment, and unsure if you ever had the strength to stand firm. This energy drain isn't accidental. It's calculated. They observe where you hesitate, where your patience is deep, and where you've invested too much to step back. They return to those areas again and again, not violently, not loudly, but precisely, keeping you on edge, doubting your own capacity, and depending on them to maintain stability. The irony is brutal. The person who appears to need you is the one quietly diminishing your independence. Recognizing this is the first step toward reclaiming yourself. Awareness cuts through the fog of exhaustion. You start noticing the cumulative effect of repeated small manipulations, the pattern of depletion, and the way your instincts were eroded over time. And when clarity arrives, the power shifts. You no longer give away your energy unconsciously. You begin protecting your strength, establishing limits, and refusing to be quietly weakened. Because once you see it, you understand. They never really needed you. They only needed access to the part of you that could be drained without resistance. And refusing to let that happen is where true liberation begins. Number 14. If you saw the full pattern instead of isolated moments, your empathy would turn into clarity. People who hurt, manipulate, or take advantage rarely do it in a way that's obvious all at once. It's piecemeal, small, almost invisible, so that every single incident feels like an isolated event, a fluke, a misunderstanding, or a one-time thing. Your empathy steps in, giving benefit of the doubt, trying to reconcile what you feel with what you see. You forgive, you rationalize, you hope. But if you could step back and see the full pattern, the repeated small betrayals, the subtle manipulations, the erosion of boundaries over time, it's no longer confusing, no longer forgivable. Empathy becomes clarity, and clarity doesn't negotiate. When you examine the full pattern, the illusions fall away. The apologies, the excuses, the charm, the fleeting warmth, they all have context now. You start noticing how each minor incident wasn't random but connected, building toward a predictable outcome. You see how your patience was measured, how your doubts were exploited, and how your energy was quietly siphoned. The confusion that kept you tied to them disappears because everything makes sense in the light of the complete story. And once sense arrives, the emotional fog lifts, leaving only truth. The realization is brutal but liberating. You understand that the moments you excused as mistakes were deliberate tests, that the times you felt guilty or unstable were orchestrated, and that the empathy you gave was often redirected to maintain their advantage. Once you see the architecture of their behavior, the full unedited pattern, you no longer need to defend, explain, or justify your feelings. You don't argue for understanding, you act with clarity. Seeing the pattern transforms your perspective entirely. It doesn't make you bitter, it makes you aware. It shifts your focus from trying to fix or rationalize someone else's behavior to protecting yourself and reclaiming your energy. When empathy becomes clarity, you stop getting pulled into cycles of manipulation. You recognize the story for what it is, stop participating in it, and move forward with an unshakable sense of control over your own life. The full story doesn't demand reaction, it demands distance, and distance becomes freedom. The truth is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. When you step back and see the full picture, it becomes clear. The behaviors you excused, the apologies you believed, the patience you extended, they weren't random. Every subtle manipulation, every quiet erasure of boundaries, every mistake and every calculated charm forms a pattern. And once that pattern is visible, it leaves no room for doubt. You realize that these people aren't complicated. They're predictable. Their actions were never about connection, love, or care. They were about control, convenience, and self-preservation. Understanding this shifts everything. It changes how you value your time, your energy, and your boundaries. It allows you to stop forgiving behaviors that were never meant to be mended. It teaches you to trust your instincts, respect your limits, and recognize when empathy has been exploited. Most importantly, it gives you clarity, the kind of clarity that cuts through confusion, hesitation, and doubt. Once you see the pattern, you stop participating in cycles that drain you, and you start reclaiming your life on your own terms. This isn't about anger or revenge, it's about liberation. It's about seeing people as they truly are, not as you wish them to be. It's about protecting yourself before patterns repeat, before energy is wasted, before boundaries are silently eroded. It's about moving forward with awareness, confidence, and the power to make decisions that serve your life, not theirs. If this video gave you clarity, insight, or even a small awakening, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss content that sharpens your awareness. Like this video if it resonated, share it with someone who needs to see the truth, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your engagement helps this community grow and empowers more people to see patterns before they drain their energy. Remember, clarity isn't given, it's earned. Protect it, respect it, and never let anyone steal it from you again. Stay awakened, chosen one.